Hi there, this is Midlife Repurposed, and we are launching a new season, getting into a brand new year. And today I'm going to be talking about intuitive productivity, how you can work with freedom, joy, and alignment without pressure or obligation. So if resolutions and words of the year and lofty goals are really frustrating you, I think you're going to like this episode. Welcome to Midlife Repurposed. If you're craving inspiration, practical tips, and a renewed sense of purpose, you're in the right place. Here, we embrace the messy, uncertain, and sometimes downright challenging turns of midlife with a dose of humor and an unwavering belief that there's treasure to be found even in the tough stuff. I'm your host, Michelle Rayburn, an author who's passionate about uncovering hope in the most unexpected places. Let's repurpose this season of life together. Hello, and welcome to Midlife Repurposed, the podcast where we look at ways to thrive in this season of life. I'm Michelle Rayburn, and I'm so excited to kick off a brand new year with you. Today, we're going to take a little different approach to those typical January conversations about goals, resolutions, and words of the year. Instead, we're going to talk about intuitive productivity and how you can work with freedom, joy, and alignment, no pressure or obligation. Now, if you've ever felt weighed down by rigid plans or you've been overwhelmed by all the shoulds in your life, then this episode is for you. I know you might be thinking, doesn't letting go of structure or rigid goals mean you'll end up wasting time or spending days on the couch binge watching Netflix? It's a common misconception, but I promise you, intuitive productivity isn't about abandoning responsibility or drifting aimlessly through your days. It's actually quite the opposite. Intuitive productivity is about tuning your instincts and energy so that you can focus on what truly matters. It's about finding a rhythm that allows you to work in alignment with your natural creativity and passions instead of forcing yourself into systems that don't fit. And when you approach work this way, you're more engaged, you're more effective, and yes, often more productive because you're working with yourself and not against yourself. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I got to this topic. I was thinking about how in the past I've had resolutions and I've had lots of goals with multiple steps, and I've only once had a word of the year. It was an accidental thing, but I have friends who love to have a word of the year. It was accidental because I made some goals and then realized they all had one theme. And so it all came together. But I don't have a time where I sit and pray and ask God to give me a word for the year because I feel a little bit restrained by that. Constrained, restrained. I feel like at the end of the year, it would be better for me to sum up how it went and then have a word for what it all looked like. 2020 was an example of why a word of the year would be really hard for us to plan out because we just don't know how it's going to go. That was the year I was going to do a lot more speaking, and I purchased a lot of books in January so that I had a lot of inventory ready. I still have some of that inventory, so if you're looking for some Christian books, I've got some in my office that I can sell you. But this is really about a journey that I've been on. It's not just related to my time. In the past few years, I've looked at my eating habits and some of the exercise habits that were very motivated by rigid plans and by a lot of things where I'm shaming myself because this didn't work out the way I thought it would. And my body was changing. And so I was introduced to intuitive eating. And with intuitive eating, you're really listening to the biofeedback that your body offers. Like when you eat that food, my body tells me it didn't like it very much. When I don't move enough, my body tells me it wants to move more. And if I don't sleep enough, my body and my brain tell me that I need more of that sleep. And the thing is, with my scheduling, I've realized that I need an intuitive approach to that as well. And there's a lot of stuff out there I discovered that talks about intuitive productivity too, because my own schedule, my feedback, the flexibility I have to have, it all has to be intuitive. And here's an example of why 2020 is a good way for us to look at, like, why, if I hadn't had a sense of intuitive productivity, it would have changed. So if I had a ton of goals on how much speaking I was going to do. And I did have some goals for expanding that. It was completely out of my control when for months there was no speaking at all. And some of the conferences that existed for a long time didn't come back again, or they now exist in an online only format, or they're a whole new thing, or, things change so much. And intuitively, I had to use this as a way of pivoting, and not sticking. I couldn't stick with the goal. I couldn't. There's no way of achieving that goal. So when I was intuitive about that productivity, I put a lot more time into podcast episodes. I already had a podcast. Life Repurposed existed already, and it's now called Midlife Repurposed. But it did exist, and I put a lot more work into that and built some community there. And so I pivoted. And my days looked different when I wasn't gone as much. And so my productivity actually increased when I didn't have so many places I had to go. So I tackled new topics that I didn't think I was going to be tackling. New projects came into my life that I had time for. And so this flexibility allows me to pick up that pace a little bit more when life hands me some surprise time like that, or slow down the pace when something interrupts it, like a health crisis or a family need or something like that. And so it's really important for us to look at our structure and work with what works for us. Now, for some people, you're thriving in the high pace that you're going, that good for you. You keep going with that. This episode is here though, for anybody who says, I'm weary of that. I want something different. I don't want to feel like a failure if I'm not doing things at a high rate every single day. And I want to tell you that for me, every single day is different. If I am back from traveling and speaking or something, I need a couple of down days. I can't be highly productive right after that. And so for me, that's the ebb and the flow. Intuitively, I know I can work on this kind of project on this day, but not this one. This requires my full focus. So we're going to look at some practical ways to make progress without the hustle and grind mentality. So let's look first then at narrowing down a definition here of what, in simple terms, is intuitive productivity. Well, simply put, it's a way of working that tunes into your instincts and energy. So it doesn't follow rigid rules and external expectations. Think of it like that intuitive eating I mentioned, where you're listening to your body and you're responding to its needs. Intuitive productivity works in the same way, where it's about focusing on what feels meaningful, energizing, and aligned with your passions and values. It's not about abandoning structure altogether. Instead, it's about creating flexibility and freedom within your day so you can focus on what matters to you without the guilt or the pressure. So there are some times when I catch myself where I'm not really being intuitive, where intuitively I know I have a lot of energy to produce and something is standing in the way. And so listening to that inner sense of like, I'm excited I should be doing something and I'm using my time in a way that's not productive, it actually helps to rein me in. So the thing that we want to look at then are some tips. So the first tip is start by checking in with yourself each day. Before you dive into your to-do list, take a moment to pause and reflect and ask yourself, what feels most exciting or meaningful today? And for me, it's not sitting in front of the TV. I'll let you know that I watch less TV now than I did when I had big to-do lists. Those are overwhelming to me. I don't know if they are to you or not either, but when I sit there with this giant to-do list, I get overwhelmed to where my brain shuts down and I don't even know where to begin. So when I look at what feels exciting or meaningful today, I do have a plan for the week. I do know what client work I need to get done, but there are some times where I think I'm going to work on one project and I get to that morning and I realize, no, I didn't sleep as well last night. I think today is going to be a really good day for me to put on some music and work on the graphic design part. And tomorrow I'll come back to the editing and thinking part. So that's what I mean by checking in and seeing which of these tasks can I do today? I let my instincts guide me then toward what feels right. And the small shift can make a difference in your energy and focus because you're not sitting there with this rigid plan where you're struggling you're just working and you're not getting anywhere because maybe you're not feeling energized or your energy has dipped and you're not allowing for the restorative break that you really need. This flexibility then allows you to work in harmony with the natural rhythms instead of fighting against them. So that's the number 2 tip, is breaking free from the rigid schedule. If you're feeling energized or creative in the morning, tackle those challenging things then. If you have an energy dip, go for the lighter work. Take that restorative break. Do what you need to do. For me, it's pivoting the types of projects I work on and sliding around some of those chunks of time that I've reserved in my calendar so that I give myself that flexibility. Like, this is due in a couple of days. I'm going to work on this tomorrow. I'm not procrastinating. I'm going to slide something else into this spot because it works for me. The third tip I have for you is to use joy as a compass. It's a little bit like what is it, Marie Kondo, the joy, when you're like, does this spark joy? It's a little bit like that, but paying attention to the tasks that bring you a sense of joy or flow. Now, we are going to have to do draining things. I just had to spend a whole day and a half working on finances so I can be ready for some of the tax things that are coming in a couple of weeks. So yes, it's necessary, and some draining things are necessary. I make them a little bit more fun, though. I put on some music or something when something feels draining, or I reward myself for getting that done. But if it's completely unnecessary, there are some things where it's like, I could approach this differently. I don't have to do it this way. It doesn't have to be draining. So I look at like making intentional space for things that bring me joy. So for me, it is really fun when I can choose the music that I put on when I'm designing something and I'm kind of rocking out in my office because it makes it fun. So if it's a task that requires silence, like editing, where I'm going to be really working hard, I schedule some breaks in between and I make those the fun things that I'm doing in between that work. The fourth tip I have for you is to set intentions and not deadlines. Now, you will need deadlines for some things. You will need, if a client has work, I have deadlines. But instead of rigid deadlines, I work on things way before the deadline so that I'm not under pressure. And then in my own work, especially in some of the writing that I do, I focus on broader intentions. Like, I want to make progress on a project this week, and I know what that project's going to be, but I'm not as rigid about saying I have to write this many pages or I have to write this many words. For me, this approach allows me to move forward and always be moving forward, and I'm very motivated by that, but I don't have this pressure to feel perfect or feel rushed. So that's really helpful for me. Tip number 5 is honoring your energy cycles. So if your energy is high, lean into that deep focused work. When it's low, give yourself permission to rest or shift to those less demanding tasks. And what makes this intuitive, and the reason why this is a separate item on the list, is that you have to ask yourself how you're feeling. And I think unrealistically, I think I'm going to wake up every day with the same amount of energy. Today that I'm recording this is a Monday after a holiday week. A week where every day felt like a Monday because the holidays were in the middle of the week, and then Thursdays felt like Mondays, and for 2 weeks in a row I was all thrown off. I've slept well, but I wasn't like fully energized this morning, and so I know that this is an ebb and flow. There are some times where my energy is high, and so I'm giving myself permission to move forward with something. Today it was clearing out some emails because they're piled up there. But I know that I'm going to dive into something else when I have that full energy. Tip number 6 is to simplify that to-do list. So one of the things that I have found is that things keep moving around on the to-do list, carrying over from one week to another. And one of my ways of simplifying that is to put some of it into my calendar in blocks. So I know I have to do it, and I put it on a particular day, like work on taxes or contact somebody, write a specific letter or something. I block out the time in that week rather than just plopping it on a to-do list. I rely on my digital calendar a lot. I go to it then to look at my tasks. And one of the things I do then is I will grab things off that list. And like I said, when I talked about sliding things around, if I open up Monday and today's first thing is not something I have the energy to do, I slide it to later in the day if I think I'm going to have more energy later, or I slide it to tomorrow and bring a chunk from tomorrow into today, knowing this is kind of a mundane thing. I can get this done. And so for me, that helps me because I don't have this giant to-do list. Things are pieced up and I know they're all going to get done by the end of the week or by the end of the month or wherever they have to be. But it allows me to simplify that to-do list. And then I can focus on a couple of things for each day. And I have to plan way out. I have some clients who book 6 months ahead with their book projects, and I need to know, am I going to be able to get that done by the deadline? And the way I do that is as soon as they book with me, I block out the time I'm going to need for their book cover project, their editing, their interior formatting, that kind of thing. But I also know when I do that, that I can within that week slide some things around as things come up. As I'm looking at my energy, as I'm looking at my family things, I'm looking at my to-do list. So when I do that, it helps me to have this clarity. I don't have the overwhelm. I'm not facing that with this big list. It's already put into that calendar and it's already managed in a way for me. So go through that to-do list, and maybe you're going to cross off some things because you don't even need to do them, or maybe you're just going to put them into a calendar so that you don't have to keep looking at the list over and over. And I'm saying this from someone who likes checking off things on a list. It's very satisfying, but it's also satisfying to not have to stare at that list every day. Now, let's look at some tips that have to do with building momentum and letting go, because it's hard to stay motivated and keep things simple and meaningful when you got a lot on your plate. Okay, I live this life, and here's why. I'm a podcaster, I'm midlife repurposed, I'm a writer, I write my own books, but I also have to pay the bills. And, being self-employed as just a writer sounds really romantic, but it also is not a way to pay all the bills. And so I have clients that I work with, and I also volunteer in various capacities, and I have family, and I have grandkids. And so midlife is way busier than I thought it was going to be, and that's okay. But that means that I have to figure out then how to keep on going when life feels overwhelming and it feels like there's more to get done than I have time for. Well, tip number 7 is to celebrate the small wins. I'm not really good at celebrating things. I'm always looking at, okay, what's next? Looking at the next thing. I have had to learn to focus on what got done and not what's left undone. Because at the end of the day, when my husband says, how was your day? There are times where I'm like, well, I didn't get done half of what I wanted to get done today. That's my story every day sometimes. And I have to look at that small steps are worth celebrating because they build positive momentum. So I outlined a book today, or I planned out something today, or I finished a project or a step in a project. Celebrating those small wins will help you to feel like you're doing something and not like you're constantly adding more to the list than you're taking away. Tip number 8, let go of multitasking. I know we think this is the way to be productive, and I am actually pretty good at multitasking, but I'm here to tell you that it is not the way to be the most productive. I can multitask, but it often has the opposite effect. When you're multitasking, you're always having to reset your brain to go back to this other thing. And when you can create focused time, you actually become present with one task at a time. This is why I use these calendar blocks in my calendar, because I can be focused on that one amount of work, this one main project and the steps that go with it, and I can stop the multitasking. And the tip I have for you that really helped me to get past this is I use a free app called My Hours, and you can put in projects and client names or whatever you need to put in there, and you can track your time. And so I can do this with my own writing too. I can track the time that I'm using. I can do this with my client work. And when you're tracking and that clock is on, it makes you not want to multitask. It makes you not want to stop to hop over to something else because I'm only 2 minutes into this and the clock's running. I got to stay on this. And so when that clock is running, it's kind of like using the Pomodoro method where you're running a timer. Using that clock is helpful for helping me to get rid of the multitasking. So you might find that that's helpful for you too. Tip number 9, trust your instincts when prioritizing. When you're faced with all these demands that are competing, trust your gut to decide what truly needs attention. So you have intuition, and you don't need to justify your choices, So if you've ever had a day where you feel like I just need a day off and your body keeps telling you I need time off, I didn't get a weekend, I really need but I feel so guilty because there's all this stuff to do and it's a Monday and I really need to do these things, but I would really like to read a book and go for a walk and I really need some coffee and some chocolate. Sounds really good. Trust your instincts when you're prioritizing. If your body says you need a day off and you didn't get a day off, I trust that I need that. So I shift, I do something different to maybe it's just an hour that I need, but I can't keep pushing ahead when my intuition is telling me I need something else. And oftentimes my intuition is driven by the Holy Spirit. It's like there's a spiritual need tied up in all of this work. And so sometimes I didn't get a Sabbath and I really didn't get some time to just focus on God. And so maybe I need that. And so I trust my intuition. I trust that my brain is wired in such a way to tell me what I need, and I don't want to keep pushing that away. Tip number 10, create space for creative exploration. Set aside that unstructured time for brainstorming, experimenting, or letting your mind wander. I love this because when I have some unscheduled time and I didn't structure it all in and I think, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do today, but I have this idea for a book. I did that a couple of days ago. It was the day after New Year's. And I was like, I just want some time to think about this book I've been like mulling over for years. And I just explored it. I started outlining and started doodling a little bit, like what could the cover look like? And that motivates me to start thinking about content. And so that creative space that I had really felt like a fun day. It feels like a day just for me, even though it was work. And that's what's fun about work that's fulfilling. So set aside that time. Maybe it's pursuing a new hobby because your work is not super fulfilling and you're looking for like, how can my hobbies be fulfilling? But do set aside that creative time. And tip number 11, reflect and adjust regularly. I can set really great goals at the beginning of a year, but I don't really know if that's the right direction. And there are many times that I have to pivot. And so intuitive productivity is a practice where you make adjustments as you learn. And so you might slow down the progress on something you thought you would have accomplished by spring, and you pick up something that you thought was on your long-term list. And some of that is just trusting that God is leading you in a direction that was different from what you thought. He's giving you clarity. And so he might be saying, hey, now's the time. You didn't know this, but this is the time. So be willing to reflect and then do those adjustments. And finally, tip number 12, say no to what doesn't align. If a task or commitment doesn't align with your values or passions, give yourself permission to say no. And this means that it might be that you're stepping down from a position, a place you've been serving, or it might mean that you're asking some people in your household to step up. Maybe you're doing something for someone else that they really can do on their own. And maybe you just need to let go and let them have some space because maybe you're micromanaging them and they're ready to go. So whatever it takes to free up space for what truly matters is a powerful thing that will help you along your journey of intuitive productivity. And obviously, I'd like to say no to cooking or cleaning and say that they don't really align with my priorities, but they do align with my wellness. And so I have to do those things. I'm trying to find some creative ways to make those easier, but it's easy for me to say I'm saying no to cleaning toilets from now on out, but that just doesn't work. So a lot of it had to do with me saying no to some opportunities, people asking me if I would be willing to serve in a certain way and saying, no, not right now. I want to really have this time, the energy that I have. I know that I need to focus on, this is my year to focus on writing that book I was thinking about, or this is the year to prioritize my relationship with my spouse or whatever it is. So those are very important things as you're thinking intuitively. So I've given you 12 practical ways that you can embrace intuitive productivity this year. Remember, it's not about abandoning your ambition. It's about working in a way that feels natural, joyful, and aligned with who you are. So trust yourself, give yourself grace, and let go of that pressure to perform. And when you do, you'll find that productivity becomes not only easier, but also much more fulfilling. I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Midlife Repurposed. I wrote an article last week about this topic. You'll find that on Substack. If you found today's tips helpful, I'd love to hear how you're planning to use them in your life. And you can connect with me on Substack. You can find me through my website. Just look for Midlife Repurposed on Substack or Michelle Rayburn on the internet. I would love to encourage you, or if you know someone who needs a little bit of encouragement as they start this year, you can feel free to share this episode with them, and I'd love to encourage them too. So until next time, here's to a year of freedom and joy and meaningful work. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to Midlife Repurposed. Looking for more inspiration and connection? Dive into Midlife Repurposed on Substack, where you'll find resources, weekly reflections, and a community of like-minded women. Visit midliferepurpose.com to join the conversation and keep the journey going.